Hi members, you're very welcome back to the continuation, I suppose, really of yesterday's session. What we will be doing today will be considering the remaining statutory legislation which is in our committee meeting pack. Just obviously advise those who are coming in then with regards to the public gallery about using their mobile phones and the availability of Wi-Fi. Apologies we've received from Dolores Kelly. We've on two matters arising which from the first part of the meeting which we held yesterday was agenda item 58, which was SR 2017-31, trunk roads T1, T3 and T7, the York Street interchange. The information in relation to that's at page 422, and what you'll find tabled is an enlarged map which has been provided by the department. So if members have a chance to look at that, and be curious to see what was being presented. It was obviously much smaller than this. So, you had an opportunity to see it. Opposed to talk us through it.
Probably do no harm, yes.
Would it be possible to get officials in relation to the York Street interchange, please?
Cheers, just for a little bit of clarity on those three decisions, maybe we can see them better.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, you're welcome back to the committee. Can you put your nameplates just on at the top table there? I think it's just sort of the members say that it might be a bit of a reach. It isn't going to be straightforward, sure it's not. Okay.
Good.
Oops. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the provision of the much larger scale drawings. Mr. McCann, you had raised queries yesterday in regard to this scheme, if you'd like to.
I'm looking at you, David. I don't know if you're correct man or not. Can you give me a bit of clarity just on this T1, T3 and T7 to explain which is the best drawing to understand that? Because obviously there's 4 different A3 drawings.
Overall, map 1 gives the overall scheme, which includes T1, T3 and T7. The additional maps then break that down. Map 2 is T1, map 3 is T3, and then map 4 will be T7.
So map 2, the area in red, am I saying, is T1, yeah?
Yes.
All in red, everything in red.
Yes.
T1.
Yes.
And map 3, everything in red is T3.
Yes.
And then map 4, everything in red is T7.
Yes.
Those 3 maps, everything in red is the T1, T3.
Yes.
That's the 3 areas in question. That's the York Street. And the maps we're looking at is current layout.
Yes, those are, yeah, current layout.
Fair enough.
Okay, are you content?
Yep.
Members, have you any other questions? Mr. Muir?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And thanks for all the information in relation to this. Just maybe a couple of questions. As we all know, there's plans, well, they're underway now in the building to the University of Ulster campus, and also down at also for declarations of interest as a former employee of. At the other end, there's Yorkgate train station. and there's the shopping centre and such like. And obviously there will be a desire over time, I would imagine, for students to be alighting at the station and for using the facilities and then travelling down what is York Street down to the university. And it's just about how do we ensure that that is a corridor that people are going to be content in using, because obviously there's quite a wide lanes and stuff like that, so how are we going to facilitate pedestrians and also cyclists to use that corridor safely? And maybe the second question, so to sort of bring it into it, is around cycling, is that the scheme, the red line of the scheme is obviously sort of denoted within the map, but it sort of comes to an end here at Rome Street and Dock Street, and that's where sort of the cycling facilities come to an end, and it's about how can we facilitate safe cycling beyond that.
Yeah, okay. Can I just take the first, there's the large, the A1 drawing shows the indicative layout in terms of cycle provision and with transport. That's what we have worked up for this part of the scheme. So this shows improved new cycle facilities and improved footways. There will be a widening of footways for pedestrian provision, which will take us down and link us into the Frederick Street junction where University of Ulster is. And again, we are also looking at that junction in terms of its overall layout, and the pedestrian facilities are recognising that there will be a significant increase in footfall due to the university. At the other end, we've been working closely with TransLink and the work that they are proposing in terms of York Street Station, and we would also be looking then to link in at that point with whatever cycle provision is extended out beyond the scheme. Dock Street we're also considering, and down round there, and how we again improve overall provision for both pedestrians and cyclists at that point. It's a fairly, the road widths are, as you say, are quite wide, although lanes are quite restricted.
I think that's important to do that, because we want to try to ensure that people use sustainable transport along this corridor, so I think that's important. Also, one of the other concerns that have been expressed was in relation to, I think, is it Henry Street, and so the houses that are there, and then sort of the elevated nature of the roadway, and there's been some concerns about sort of the fact that they'll be sort of further down, and I don't know whether there's been any sort of consideration given to that.
There has, and this was an issue that was raised at the public inquiry at the time, and was addressed through some of the provision. We will be putting in screening along there. There'll be additional planting and a wall, correct, for sound, to reduce sound levels. So that has been considered as part of the scheme design.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beggs.
My colleague here has highlighted an important aspect of the scheme in terms of how it may impact on pedestrians and cyclists. My understanding is you're wanting to have free flow of traffic without traffic lights, etc., and that's the reason for the additional flyovers, etc. So in terms of York Street, which is quite an important street for pedestrians, possibly cyclists as well, but certainly for rail users coming into the centre of Belfast or to the university campus, that route will become increasingly busy with the York Street station servicing certainly the East Antrim area, but on top of that the university is retaining its residential flats at Jordanstown, as I understand. So undoubtedly there will be increased students using that station. So my question is, what will their path be? It's hard to make out in the drawings the impact on pedestrians. So will there be user-friendly facilities for pedestrians so that they are not restricted?
Yes, I think if the larger drawing, the A1 drawing provides the sort of full details of the current proposals along York Street, extending out towards York Street Station. So that's what's currently proposed as part of the design. In general terms, overall, the scheme aims to take the strategic traffic away completely from the local road network and allow it to link the motorway with the West Link. So it allows us to enhance the provisions along York Street itself. So there will no longer be any strategic traffic on that part of the network.
Sorry, just looking at this drawing, is this York Street? That
Yes,
you're
yes, it
showing
is.
now?
The right-hand side of the drawing is where York Street Station is, and then on the left
York Street
is
Exchange, okay.
where the university is.
We've just received these, so I haven't
Yeah,
had
no, I
time to
appreciate
study them. Okay, so is this an elevated road, York Street, then, or is the flyover above all of this? Because it's
Yeah, this York Street will go over the top of the motorway at that point. So, as it passes Cityside, if you're coming from York Street Station towards Cityside, so that's at the level that it's at the moment. The road,
Okay.
the road will then rise up and over the top of the motorway, and then back down to meet back in
Okay.
again at the university, essentially. So it means that they're not being mixed with any of the motorway traffic.
Okay, members content?
Yep.
Any further questions?
Just one other question. We have another stock rule coming later in terms of weight in terms of the weight of vehicles and authorised weights. I take it the future plan of any of these roads will facilitate any change in types of vehicles that will come in the future, yeah? Is that considered, yeah?
These will be designed just to the current standards.
On future standards and looking at, say, we decide to change the fuel type or heavier vehicles or anything else, is that considered?
Well, if any of that comes forward as part of the process that we go through in terms of procurement, then that could be taken into account as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Members content? Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you. So if you're content, then we'll read the motion. The Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2017-31, trunk roads T1, T3 and T7, York Street Interchange, Border Northern Ireland 2017, and subject to the Examiner Statutory Rules report, there's no objection. Moving then to agenda item 60, again this was from yesterday, and this is SR 2017-226, which is the Trunk Road T3 Western Transport Corridor Order. That's at page 454 of your first pack. At page 37 of the table pack is the High Court of Justice ruling. The High Court quashed the rule, and we will now need to await the report from the Examiner's Statutory Rules in relation to that. And also just advise you that the Department won't be providing a copy of the PAC report at this time, but will do so along with funding details at a future meeting whenever the committee will deal with the proposals in relation to this road. So if you're content, just gives obviously members a bit of time as well at that particular meeting, just to do a little bit more scrutiny around that. So if you're content with that, okay, at this stage, thank you. Okay, moving then on to item 72, which is SR 2017-191, and this in relation to motor vehicles on this weight. Defined the statutory rule in relation to this at page 656 of your pack. The purpose of the rule is to facilitate the implementation of the Commission Directive 2015-719 of the European Parliament and of the Council of the 29th of April 2015, which is the directive. This amends Council Directive 96/53/EC on the maximum authorised dimensions in national and international traffic and the maximum authorised weights in international traffic. Are members content with the rule, or do you have any queries or questions you'd like to put to officials?
So that's the one raised earlier, just in case.
Okay, so content. So the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2017-191, the Motor Vehicles Authorised Weight, Construction and Use Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2017, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Moving then to item 73, which is SR 2017-225. Might be useful maybe to get Alex in for this one, actually, if that's possible. Thank you. So that's on page 683 of your pack. And the purpose of the regulations is to amend Part 1 of the Schedule 2, the taxis, taximeters, devices and maximum fares regulations, Northern Ireland 2015, which sets out the maximum fare tariff that may be charged by the driver of a taxi operating a taximeter. We'll just wait, some officials are coming at this stage. You're very welcome again.
Hello.
We're looking actually at SR 2017-225 in relation to the taximeters, and I know that there wasn't a consultation, I think, just in relation because it was seen as changes seemed to be minor. Is that that's the case?
Right, yeah. It was actually a minor error, Chair. What happened was, just to ensure that the industry didn't adhere to the incorrect tariff, which was actually transcribed in the legislation, the Taxis Act Programme Board met immediately after the regulations were made. And there's a maximum tariff fare sheet, and that was changed to reflect the correct fare tariff. So the taxi industry used that immediately, and then it was just a question of changing the regulations to reflect.
So there wasn't really anything adverse in relation to that?
No, they weren't charging
the
waiting time. It actually refers to the waiting time charge. So they were using the correct fare tariff in practice, but just the regulations reflected the incorrect amount. They were just prescribed wrong.
Okay. Mr. Boylan?
Yeah, Chair, because I spent 10 years at the Taxis Act. I mean, it's still on me, but just in relation to what was the error again, just for clarity?
It was, instead of 3 minutes and 32 seconds, it said 4 minutes and 46 seconds, and instead of 3 minutes and 9 seconds, it said 1 minute and 35 seconds, and that related capital to the waiting time, you know, where that element that determines the charge when the taxi is stopped or moving at slow speed. So it was just the way the regulation was drafted. It had just been
Technical.
It was a technical issue, yeah.
Just on that, in relation to one, obviously, because I know there's a very, very strong lobby across the board in terms of the taxi industry. Have you any feedback in terms of responses? And also, is there any financial implications for the taxi industry?
No feedback. As I say, it was rectified practically. You know, the tariff fare sheet was fixed immediately, and then it was just a question of fixing the regulations to reflect that. But in practice, they were actually using the correct tariffs, so there was no feedback there, and there was no financial implications for the taxi industry.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any other questions in relation to this rule? No? Okay, thank you. That the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2017-225, the taxi meters, devices and maximum fares amendment regulations Northern Ireland 2017, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Thank you. Oh, right, okay. Well, you're staying for the next few. Okay, that's fine. Can I just remind members that in relation to their mobile phones, there seems to be some interference with recording, so if you can switch them off or put them to airport mode or whatever you need to do in order to ensure that interference doesn't continue. So moving then to 74, which is SR 2018-85. That's the Motor Vehicles Testing Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2018, and that's at page 712. This statutory rule will be taken along with the following 5, as they are also all being amended to give effect to the requirements of Directive 2014/45 EU of the European Parliament and of the Council of the 3rd of April 2014 on periodic roadworthiness tests for motor vehicles and their trailers. Much of the content of Directive 2014/45 EU is already being mostly implemented by existing domestic legislation. However, some changes are required, and details of the changes are at page 741 of your pack. There has been one expression of concern which has been addressed. There have been no quality impact and no regulatory impact assessments carried out. There is a financial cost, as some classes of the vehicles which are currently tested on the MOT system will now have to apply for a goods vehicle test. and the difference in fee is £40. Some vehicles which are currently exempt from testing will now be subject to test and will have to pay a fee for that annual test. However, given the very small numbers of vehicles affected, the department considers that the overall financial impact will be negligible. Can I just ask, in relation to, obviously some of the vehicles which are now being tested are not sort of conventional vehicles, and there will have to be maybe changes to some of the systems. What is the cost, or will that be applied to all SIP test centres, or will there be specific test centres that they will be directed to?
They can't be tested at all test centres, Chair. And as you say, there are 6 pieces of legislation that had to be amended to give effect to this directive. And also, as you mentioned, it's not significant changes in a sense. It's I wouldn't say minor changes, but certainly it's bringing more vehicles into scope in terms of requiring the goods vehicle certificate. As you said, it became effective in May 2018.
Okay.
And if you like, I'm happy to sort of run through what those changes are more or less taking place now.
That would be useful.
That would be helpful to the committee.
Thank you.
Firstly, there are a number of changes that relate to ordinary vehicles. When I say ordinary vehicles, I mean cars and the like. For example, reversing lamps fitted to motor vehicles first used from the 1st of September 2009. Daytime running lamps and front fog lamps only were fitted on motor vehicles first used from the 1st of March 2018, and that's when the legislation came into effect. A brake fluid contamination check were visible in the reservoir. And these are all things that I should have said the testers will obviously be looking for when the vehicle goes through. A check of the engine management system lamp. That's the small yellow thing when you switch your car. It looks like an engine. Now, if that stays on after you switch the vehicle on and it is clearly visible, then that would be a problem, because that would be a fail during the test as well. So those probably most of us won't fall foul of that if we do MOT our car, because it'll be, the vehicle will be performing all the functions that they require. But if not, then it does impact on obviously standard vehicles, and they could fail as a result. There are other changes, and you mentioned in relation to vehicles constructed, if you like, as a goods vehicle, where a chassis would be sort of amended or changed to carry a mobile crane, for example. You see those travelling up and down the motorways. Vehicle equipped with medical, dental, health or veterinary equipment, laboratory, educational or clerical purposes, and engineering plant, as I say, were mounted on a vehicle. All those things now require the certification. They come into the scope of the goods licensing procedure. So again, while by and large those the major changes, while not seen overall in the context of vehicle testing as significant, they did and do make a change to anyone that either has one of those, as we call them, unique type vehicles, or ordinary cars, if they fail to comply with any of those other pieces of regulation.
Okay, and just with regards to then additional cost for installation of new systems, was that required for this legislation?
When you say in terms of DVA,
yes,
it did impact. Some test centres are equipped to look after these vehicles, some are not. It depends. Not every DVA test centre would be capable. For example, they're large tractors, what's called T tractors, the very large ones that maybe would carry, not necessarily on a farm, but would be used in the construction industry, would have the capacity to look at these vehicles. So by and large, what DVA try to do is push ask the people to use those test centres. Now, it may mean you're not going to the test centre that you would normally use, maybe which is just down the road from where you live. But at the moment, and not all test centres can do that. Now, as the committee probably knows, DVA are going through a major change process at the moment in terms of designing and producing new test centres, and that work's been ongoing for some time. Obviously, the design and construction of those centres will take into account this, and obviously looking forward, that will have to include some sort of determination on the volume of vehicles that would be required to be tested. So that's down the road, a while. But at the moment, no, not all test centres. It doesn't mean a huge extra cost to the owner of these vehicles, other than the fact that they have to go, as I say, to a test centre that maybe not the one that they would normally use.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Beggs?
You've indicated that there are some additional checks, warning lights, fog lights, etc. Not a huge deal of change for the average motorist, but nevertheless there are additional checks to be made. And on top of that, just in your latter conversation, you're referring to heavy construction equipment. I think that's getting caught under the those that have included those who are less than 25 miles per hour top speed, etc., above 15 to 25 mile an hour, that sort of limit. But you've said that not every centre will have that, and that as a result, people will have to travel further. There will be quite, if you're travelling at 25 miles an hour and you have to travel a considerable distance, that is time, costs time and money. So how many centres and how geographically spread are the centres that are able to test for these, and what plans have you to ensure that there is a good coverage?
The number of centres, off the top of my head, I couldn't actually give you a precise answer for that. But what I do know is what DVA try to do is to ensure that the amount of travel that these vehicles have to go is minimised, i.e. they try to send them to the nearest centre. To accept what you're saying, there might be some additional travel time involved in that. There's at the moment no way around that, as I say, because not all centres are capable of looking at these vehicles. I'm not involved in the DVA process of redesigning or coming up with a new centres, so I couldn't say how they intend to operate in the future.
Could you, Madam Chair, could we have a list of those centres that can cater for these at present, so we're aware of it?
Yeah.
And the other aspect of the additional tests that we're talking about is additional time. And during the summer, motorists experienced considerable delays in being able to get timely appointments. There was a large waiting list. And any additional work will potentially have a cumulative effect and could worsen the situation. So my question is, how are you going to ensure that appointments are going to be available in the future and that we don't experience the delays that occurred last summer?
Again, I'm not trying to duck that one, but that's not a question that I would be responsible for answering. That's an operational matter for DVA. So again, that is an issue that would need to be directed to them.
Okay, that may be something.
Have you an idea of what percentage additional workload will fall on centres as a result of this new legislation?
No, because again, as I say, obviously DVA colleagues would have been aware that we were introducing this legislation, but how they operationalise it in terms of how they cope with any increase is very much a DVA issue. It's not for my section to actually determine.
But in bringing forward new legislation, you ought to know what the impact is going to be.
Well, of course, it's not legislation that we can pick or choose. As you know, it's a directive, so implementing it was not a choice. It is an EU directive and had to be implemented. I have no knowledge, and certainly no one from DVA or colleagues at DVA have indicated that this has caused any undue problems for them. Certainly, maybe that's a conversation may need to be had with DVA.
Well, I was going to ask members content that we arrange in our forward work programme for DVA to come to brief the committee, because there's obviously a number of issues in relation to testing and the new centres and so on, which we maybe want to explore with them directly.
Yep.
Okay. Mr. McCartney.
The question would wait until then.
I'm sorry?
The question would wait until DVA arrive.
Okay.
Much more than.
Thank you, Mr. Boylan.
Yeah, the same thing, Chair, because I mean, they understand then 1, 2, 3, just go through the categories to see the changes, but I'll wait till they come again and we'll have discussion about the different categories. Okay,
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Mr. Buchanan?
I'll refer this to you, Mr. Boyle. Just on you mentioned the 6 different regulations we're looking at here: 85, 86, 87, 88, 89. Were they all consulted at the same time?
Oh, yes. It was all part of the one package, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, members content? Okay, thank you. So, just read the motion that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2018-85, the Motor Vehicles Testing Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2018, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. SR 2018-86, it's at page 744, and again, this is taken in association with the previous item. Members are content that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2018-86, the Goods Vehicle Testing Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2018, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule.
great.
SR 2018-87 at page 775, and again taken in association with item 73. The Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2018-87, the Motor Vehicles Construction and Use Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2018, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Next one is SR 2018-88. Found at page 804, again taken in association with agenda item 73. Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2018-88, the Roads Vehicles Lighting Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2018, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. SR 2018-89, found at page 834, and again taken in association with agenda item 73. Members being content with the rule that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2018-89, the Public Services Vehicles Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2018, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. SR 2018-90, Taxi Licensing Amendment Regulations, again it's at page 865, and take association with item number 73, that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2018-90, the Taxi Licensing Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2018, and subject to the Examiner Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Content. Moving then through to item 80, SR 2018-132, it's the Motor Vehicles Driving Licences Amendment Regulations. And you'll find that at page 893. And the purpose of this rule is to make changes to medical standards in respect of drivers of Group 1 vehicles, that's mainly cars and motorcycles, who have diabetes, in order to facilitate the implementation of Commission Directive EU 2016 1106, the 2016 Directive on Driving Licences. The changes being made are aimed at relaxing the rules which apply to Group 1 drivers with diabetes if their condition is adequately controlled and they do not endanger road safety. There have been no objections to the rule during the consultation. Members, any comments in relation to that?
Just are we update on that? No discussion, no report back or anything. We listen here, no.
No, not yet.
No issues yet.
No issues.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Members content? Okay, the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2018-132, the Motor Vehicles Driving Licences Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2018, And subject to the examiner's statutory rules report, has no objection to the rule. Item 81, which is SR 2019-12. The purpose of the rule is to fully implement obligations of the United Kingdom under EU law in the field of drivers' hours and tachographs for the carriage of goods and passengers by road, and under the European Agreement concerning the work of crews of vehicles engaged in the international road transport of 1st of July 1970 as amended. This must be addressed before the point at which the UK leaves the European Union. Statutory consultation was not undertaken in relation to the statutory rule, as it simply seeks to implement existing EU law and the AETR. There is no viable alternative to fully implementing the UK's international obligations in this area, which are to ensure that the EU drivers' hours and tachograph rules and the AETR are fully enforceable, and there are no financial implications of the rule. Are members content, or are there questions associated with this one? Mr. Beggs?
Fully understand the reason for the rule and to enable drivers to drive in other parts of Europe, and to enable drivers who may be delivering loads from other parts of Europe to arrive here. We obviously have the transitions arrangement, which will carry forward to the end of December. Does this international agreement enable transport to operate normally beyond the end of December, or is that still up for discussion?
Yeah, it's maybe useful if I give a wee bit of background just on that. Say at the moment, with UK being a member state, we're subject to EU rules, but those EU rules also provide for the fact that on occasion journeys will take vehicles outside of the EU, at which point they're subject to international driving rules, which is AETR. So really what this came about, these regulations came about because in preparing for EU exit, all of the legislation in Department for Transport and GB, they were looking at all their legislation and noticed that the original transposition wasn't, it probably wasn't as clear as it could have been, so that was the purpose of this, was to correct it. It prompted us to look at our legislation. We needed to make the same change, which we've done. But yes, once we leave the EU, international journeys would be subject to AETR, and essentially the AETR and the EU rules are very much the same. They're almost identical. So.
Chair, I do have 3 or 4 specific questions, but if asked to yourself, maybe if the committee writes, just for clarification.
If there's something that you'd like to ask at this point, just ask.
Well, it's just to do that. Well, Chair, it's a raft of things. We could be here all day, but
we'll give you a few minutes.
No, I mean, because I was trying to read through it and understand what the changes were previous to this and what they are now exactly what they are. The likes of how the industry feel about it, how they're reacting to it. Mm-hmm. Those 2 questions for now, and then I'll write. I might be able to write some others, just specifically.
Essentially, really, this is no change for the industry. It's more the fact that lawyers looking at the legislation realised that it possibly hadn't been drafted in such a way as to achieve the intended objective. So it's, for the most part, what this was doing is it'll be no surprise to the industry. It's simply making sure that the existing legislation is fully clear. The urgency about it was that we needed to get our legislation in advance of EU exit. We needed to get it to the stage where it was fully transposed, so that any changes that needed to be made beyond that, and there are further changes, those further changes to prepare us for EU exit were made through a Westminster SI.
And did that give the industry adequate time to adapt and change to it?
There's really no change for the industry.
No, Chair, I'm happy enough with that, but there's 1 or 2 others.
If there's something else you'd like to ask now while officials are here.
It's about the specific action proposed to minimise regulatory burdens on small business. So, I mean, they need to put that in writing rather than trying. Which we would need to put it in writing, sorry.
Okay, just obviously want to clear this today, so there's nothing that you need
But no,
to ask
no,
that
I'm
would
happy enough, yeah, I'm
prevent us
happy enough to
moving
clear it,
forward.
but still get an explanation, you know what I mean? And
Put it in the record what he's asked.
Well, if you ask now, if you want to ask the questions now, we need to just put it on the record.
You need to put it on the
for-
record now,
Yes.
okay. But just,
I mean, maybe it's worth, sorry, maybe it's just worth clarifying that none of this will come as a surprise to the industry. To be honest, it's effectively making sure that the legislation
not
reflects
impacting
what
any way on small business.
No, there's no additional impacts as a result of this. It's simply making sure that in enforcing the EU directive, our legislation fully reflects the requirements of EU regulations.
Okay, Chair.
Is there anything additional that
No,
you want to ask? Are you
it's
content?
a small business issue, no, but it's grand. There's clarification there.
Right.
Okay.
Members are content that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2019-12, the Drivers' Hours and Tachographs Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2019, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Moving then to item 82, which is SR 2019-194. You'll find that at page 929 of your packs. The purpose of the regulations is to give effect to Commission implementing Regulation EU 2016-799, which introduces new requirements in relation to a more advanced type of tachograph, referred to as a smart tachograph. The regulations amend the Passenger and Goods Vehicles Recording Equipment Regulations Northern Ireland 1996 to enable enforcement provisions to apply in relation to these smart tachographs. The regulations also make minor consequential amendments to the Drivers' Hours and Tachograph Amendment EU Exit Number 2, Regulations 2019, SI 2019 number 596, which corrects deficiencies in EU law relating to tachographs in order to ensure that provisions in domestic law relating to tachographs will apply effectively from EU exit day. Is there anything additional maybe that you want to add to that?
Not really, Chair. I mean, it's maybe just worth setting the scene a wee bit. This legislation applies to the drivers of buses and coaches, excuse me, and drivers of goods vehicles, so they're subject to maximum driving hours and have to take minimum breaks and rest periods. The tachograph is simply the recording device that helps measure all of that. And really what these regulations are doing is reflecting the fact that there's a new tachograph, a better tachograph, more up-to-date digital version, and it's really changing our legislation so that we can reflect that and enforce in instances where I think it's from the 15th of June, new vehicles have to be fitted with this new tachograph. So anything new coming onto the market will have this tachograph. So it's to ensure that where there is an offence that occurs beyond that date, that we're able to actually enforce against it.
So these will be fitted to new vehicles automatically, but they'll also then be retrofitting then?
The new tachograph only has to be fitted on vehicles after manufactured after the 15th of June, so older vehicles can have older tachographs. Although the point about retrofitting is interesting because there was a supply issue at the beginning that was a manufacturer supply issue that there wasn't sufficient tachographs available to fit them on new vehicles. So as a workaround, the latest version that was available was fitted, and then retrofitting is being done. I think my understanding is I would need to check, but I think the supply issue is resolved now.
Thank you. Mr. Buchanan?
That's only just to start on new vehicles manufactured.
Yes,
You're retrofitting the new tachograph whenever the older tachograph is replaced on the new vehicles.
It would be retrofitting on any vehicle that was manufactured after the 15th of June 2019 but had been fitted with an old one because a new one wasn't available, yeah.
Members have any other questions or queries? Thank you. The Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2019-194, the Passenger and Goods Vehicles Vehicle Tachographs Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2019, and subject to the examiner's statutory rules report, has no objection to the bill. Moving then to item 83, which is SR 2019-74, and you'll find information in relation to that at page 940 of your packs. The purpose of this is to amend the Disabled Persons Badges for Motor Vehicle Regulations, Northern Ireland 1993, the 1993 regulations, by prescribing a new form of the blue badges. So essentially these are mirroring changes which are made then in England, Scotland and Wales. Have members any comments in relation to this? Okay, thank you. So the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2019-74, the Disabled Persons Badges for Motor Vehicles Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2019, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Item 84, which is SR 2019-27, and you'll find that at page 952 of your packs. And the purpose of these regulations is to update legislation for Northern Ireland concerning international passenger travel by bus and coach. This is to give effect to the existing requirements of EU market access arrangements covered by EC Regulations 1073/2009, and to implement the Interbus Agreement, which governs occasional international bus and coach travel, for example, holidays and tours, between its contracting parties. The regulations make a range of implementing provisions, such as designating the Department as the competent authority for the granting of licences, authorisations and own account transport operations, and makes provision for the operation of non-UK registered coaches in Northern Ireland, including exemptions from specific aspects of Northern Ireland legislation and the establishment of offences for non-compliance with market access rules. They also provide for Northern Ireland-based operators who wish to undertake international work. No formal consultation has been carried out, and this is because the instrument will update the law that supports activity as it currently takes place. The measures will not affect any group disproportionately, and there are no financial implications. Is there anything additional that we need to reflect on with regards to this one?
We have a colleague here, not at the table, but with a colleague who can provide further briefing.
It might be useful if that's okay for them to come in.
Okay.
Fine.
Morning.
Good morning. Just looking at SR 2019-27.
Okay.
So just giving a brief summary in relation to the SR, and if there was any additional information. We were kindly advised by your colleague that you could come in just and give us any additional information required on this, just to sort of set the scene, and give some background on the regulation.
Yeah, the regulation was essentially brought in to bring together the existing market access legislation that was in place, a European regulation on that, 1073, and also to account for the Interbus Agreement. Now, the Interbus Agreement is between the EU and other states, so I can give you the list if you like. It's essentially Eastern European countries that are part of the EU. And there's agreement in place around, again, market access for what's known as occasional service, so that's the closed door tours or day trips.
Okay.
And that's essentially what that's about. It was about bringing Interbus into place because at present the UK is a member of Interbus by virtue of being a member of the EU. So in terms of contingency arrangements regarding the EU exit, there was a need to bring Interbus into place in domestic legislation to allow for continued access to that agreement.
Any, Mr. Muir?
Just in terms of this covering occasional bus services, what in terms of sort of less occasional, more regular bus services?
The regular services are covered under the 1073 element of the. So as it currently stands, they're still under 1073. the withdrawal agreement's currently going through the House of Lords during the transition period. That will also be the case. The 1073 will cover regular services and special regular services. So essentially, it's during the transition period, nothing changes.
Mr. Beggs?
You're saying during the transition period we have normal running. So beyond that, are you saying there's yet no agreement for the likes of regular services such as the air coach?
Beyond that, will be part of the future agreement with the EU.
Okay, any, Mr. Boylan?
Just a question, does this impact on non-commercial, non-profit services?
No, because it's international services. So,
Any further queries, questions? Okay.
sorry, just to clarify that there's availability for own account operators. So there would be operating non-commercially and non-profit making, but it's a limited number of own account operators. Are you thinking more along the lines of permit holders?
Yeah.
It wouldn't necessarily.
It doesn't impact. Okay, thank you.
Okay, members content? Okay, thank you. Okay, so the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2019-27, Public Services, International Passenger Services Regulations, Northern Ireland 2019, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Moving then on to item 85, which is SR 2017-84, and you'll find that at page 969 of your pack. And the purpose of these regulations is to give effect to Articles 30 and 32 of Regulations EC number 1371/2007 of the European Parliament and of the Council of 23rd of October 2007 concerning the rights of rail passengers. The Department issued a public consultation document on the 30th of August 2016. 2 responses were received to the consultation, a summary of which is attached at page 973. The Department has replied to those who responded to the consultation, addressing any issues raised. Would members any queries in regard to this rule? Okay. Content that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2017-84, the Rail Passengers' Rights and Obligations Designation and Enforcement Regulations, Northern Ireland 2017, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Moving on to item 86, which is SR 2019-15. You find that at page 978 of your packs. And the purpose of these regulations are required to amend the railways infrastructure, access management and licensing of railway undertakings regulations Northern Ireland 2016, which is SR 2016 number 420, in order to take account of the EU Directive 2016-2370. These amendments relate to the field of railway infrastructure. Have members any questions in regard to this? Members content that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2019-15, the Railways Infrastructure Access Management and Licensing of Railway Undertakings Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2019, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule.
Great.
Moving then to item 87, SR 2019-20. The statutory rules found at page 994 of your packs. And the purpose of these regulations is to amend the Road Vehicles Lighting Regulations Northern Ireland 2000 to take account of the establishment of a UK-wide trailer registration scheme created under powers contained in the Haulage Permits and Trailer Registration Act 2018. Do members have any queries, questions? No. Content? Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2019-20, the Road Vehicles Lighting Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2019, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Item 88, which is SR 2018-193, and you'll find that at page 1003 of your packs. The statutory rule will revoke defunct and superfluous legislative provisions transposing European directives. Do you have any questions, queries? No additional information required. Members content that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2018-193, the Harbour Works Environmental Impact Assessment Revocation Regulations Northern Ireland 2018, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Moving then to item 89, which is SR 2018-196, and you'll find that at page 1009. These regulations amend the Water Environment Floods Directive Regulations Northern Ireland 2009 to replace out-of-date references to other legislation. A consultation and impact assessments weren't necessary given the technical nature of the amendments. Members, any queries? Content? The Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2018-196, the Water Environment Floods Directive Amendment Number 2, Regulations Northern Ireland 2018, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Moving then to item 90, which is SR 2019-2009, SR 2019-209, and you'll find that information at page 1015. And the purpose of the regulations is to ensure that Council Directive 2014-52 EU is implemented in Northern Ireland in respect of canal schemes and certain marina works. Council Directive 2011-92 EU, known as the Environmental Impact Assessment or EIA Directive, is itself a codification of previous EIA directives on the assessment of the effects of certain public and private projects on the environment, and requires Member States to ensure that projects likely to have significant effects on the environment are subject to environmental impact assessments. Council Directive 2014-52 EU amended the EIA Directive in order to strengthen the quality of the environmental impact assessment procedure and to simplify that procedure with a view to improving resource efficiency, ensure the objectivity of the competent authority and enhance coherence with other EU legislation. A consultation exercise was not considered necessary as the changes are not controversial and do not impact any organisation other than the Department for Infrastructure when exercising powers under Part 3 of the Water Northern Ireland Order 1999. Members, any queries, Mr. Boylan?
What does it exactly strengthen the EIA?
Oh, do we need to get a different officials in at this
Sorry.
stage?
Sorry, just one me. Question.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Brief. Andrew? We have a question in relation to SR 2019-209.
Right.
Yeah, just what way does it strengthen the EIA?
Well, in a sense, there's a sort of a deregulatory aspect of this, and what it's trying to do is to simplify the whole procedure, the procedure, make it more straightforward. So, whenever the earlier regulations were amended, it sort of covered drainage schemes and drainage works, etc., and it didn't specifically deal with canal schemes or marina works. So, in a sense, it makes that more specific, and it deals with those in particular, and then applies the requirement to do a more detailed EIA to that. So that's the way in which it helps. It sort of clarifies the whole issue.
Okay, thanks, Sharon.
Okay, members, any other questions in relation to this SR? No? Okay, thank you. The Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2019-209, the Waterways Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations Northern Ireland 2019, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Agreed. Moving on to item 91, which is SR 2019-1220. and you'll find that at page 1048 of your packs. And the purpose of this rule is to increase the price of a spectator badge for road racing events at the Dundroad circuit. And that's increased from £25 to £30. Members have any questions or queries in relation to this? Okay. Members are content that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2019-120, the Dundroad Circuit Admission Charges Regulations Northern Ireland 2019, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Moving then to item 92, which is SR 2019-166. That's at page 1054 of your packs. And the purpose of the rule is to stop up the central reservations of the A1 Drumore Bypass, Drumore, and the A1 Drumore Road, Hillsborough, to prevent vehicles from crossing from one side of the dual carriageway to the other at 2 locations. During the consultation period, an objection was received to the proposed stopping up on the A1 Drumore Road, Hillsborough. The objector was concerned that as a result of the closure of the gap on the A1 Drumore Road, Hillsborough, that they would have to travel further to get to and from lands on either side of the road, and this would have a negative impact on their business. Despite engagement with officials, the objector was unwilling to remove the objection, and the department has considered the objection, decided that the proposed abandonment order should still proceed, as the department considers that the need to enhance safety on the A1 outweighs the objector's concerns. I'd like to raise this with the officials. We're looking at SR 2019-166, obviously in relation to the objection that was raised with regards to the closure of the gap on the A1. Could you maybe give us a little bit more information in relation to that issue?
I'm not actually aware of the objection as such. Yeah. Specifically, I can't speak about the objection, but I mean, when we were bringing this forward, we discussed it with all the landowners. I think the objection was basically that he was going to have to travel further, but obviously that was resolved with him because obviously we were able to proceed.
Okay, and has he since withdrawn his objection?
As far as I'm aware,
No, I don't.
I can't confirm that, so I'll have to check that. To be fair.
I understand it's in the explanatory memorandum that this wasn't, and it's still in place.
We might have another colleague there who might be able to give a better explanation.
That might be useful if you could get them to
Apologies
come
for
in,
that.
would be helpful. I have Ms. Kimmon
Yeah.
and Mr. Beggs. We'll wait until they...
Oh, yeah.
But does anyone else wish to? Mr. Muir. Just as a query, has this work been carried out?
Yes.
So it has been stopped up already?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's purely it's like number 60 odd yesterday.
Yes.
It was a safety issue. The majority of the closures were by agreement, because there was alternative. I mean, a lot of these accesses were not used and hadn't been used in 20 or 30 odd years, and there was alternative accesses onto minor roads. So this one, as I said, the objection I wasn't aware of, but the majority of them were by agreement.
Can you shed any further light on this in relation to the gentleman's query and the objection that he made at the time?
Yeah, I understand.
gentleman objected that he would have to travel, I think, as much as maybe 3/4 of a mile to go from one side of his property. He actually runs a farming business, and he was property on one side of the A1 and property on the other side. And he was concerned about moving the larger vehicles from one side of the motorway to the other. Although the engineers advised us that they felt actually the proposed route that they suggested was available to him would have been actually, they thought, safer, I think.
Okay, we'll explore this further as a number of members have indicated. Ms Kimmins?
Yeah, I suppose to say that the road safety improvements are very welcome. It's undoubtedly one of the most dangerous roads here in the north, and I know particularly in my own area there's a very strong lobby in terms of the improvements. So it was really just a query just on how then do the cars cross, now that the centre reservations have been stopped up, what way?
They're not all stopped up, obviously.
Yeah.
These were, to be fair, these were a precursor to the grade separated junctions. So these were a number of access points identified as not being used, or at least had very minimal use. Yeah. So basically what we did was we actually went out and discussed it with the landowner who had the access from a field to the median point, and we discussed it with them. They had alternative arrangements. They said they probably hadn't used them in 20, 30 years and stuff like that. So these were ones that identified that were, reluctant to say it, but were easy to close. Yeah. There is other ones still at the present time that aren't so easy to use, and this is why the grade separated junctions will be coming in. So, yeah.
That's grand. Thank you.
Mr Beggs?
In your background briefing, you've indicated that there was 195 accidents at these types of junctions over the 7-year period, and that 45% of them, of the accidents on the road, were at these junctions. 195 accidents on the overall road. So there has been a valid reason to seek road improvement. But in your briefing from on the 9th of September, it's indicated that it's proposed to provide an accommodation lane in lieu of the losing the right turn facility at this location when the main scheme is constructed. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Has that happened, or when's the main scheme occurring?
Well, it's the main scheme is going to public inquiry, I think, in March, the grade separated junction. So, I mean, it's an ongoing process. The new road hasn't been provided or anything. That would be further down the line after vesting, stuff like that, and with discussion with the landowners as an accommodation work. So
this particular lane, is that a mitigation that you're proposing in this area to try and minimise the additional travel area?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr Muir.
Yeah, Mr Beggs has probably asked for most of my questions. Just really, is there outline timescales for this scheme? Because the number of people who have been sort of killed and seriously injured as a result of this is really a matter of real concern. So
I would have thought. I mean, being honest, I would have thought that would say for the minister to take forward, obviously in the priority list. Really, as I said, the public inquiry, I think it's 15th of March, in around those dates. So after that, then it's where it appears. Then.
Okay.
This is a scheme which has been considered for quite a considerable length of time, so it is regarded as a priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, members content? That the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2019-166 central reservations on the A1 Drumore Bypass, Drumore, and the A1 Drumore Road, Hillsborough, stopping up order Northern Ireland 2019, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Moving on to item 93, and could we have officials in relation to this one as well, please? This is so we're moving on to item 93, which is SR 2017-83, and you find that information at page 1065 of your packs. You're very welcome.
Morning, thank you very much.
So just advise that these regulations revoke and replace the Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations Northern Ireland 2015, They're being made to transpose changes made to EU Directive 2011-92 EU1 by EU Directive 2014-52 EU2. The amended EIA directive was introduced primarily to simplify the rules for assessing the potential significant negative effects of projects on the environment. It is intended to lighten unnecessary administrative burdens, reinforce the quality of decision-making, improve current levels of environmental protection, and introduce a more harmonised regulatory framework with a view to making business decisions on public and private investments more sound, more predictable and sustainable in the longer term. A consultation paper was issued in December 2016 for 8 weeks, together with an early draft of the regulations. Substantive responses were received from 47 consultees. Representations came from a range of interest groups, including councils, business groups and environmental groups. This is regarded as a satisfactory response level, and those who commented can be regarded as a reasonable cross-section of interested opinion. The range of responses indicated broad support for the Department's approach to the transposition of the EIA directive, with many respondents welcoming the proposals. The main direct financial costs arising from transposing the directive fall to developers in commissioning consultants to prepare an environmental statement, and these costs are unlikely to change significantly. I just have a couple of questions just in relation to this, if that's okay. I mean, I understand that at present the department and the councils are using DCAN 10, which relates to 2017 legislation, and it's my understanding that there has been no development practice note issued for EIAs. When is that likely to happen?
Yes, Chair, the DCAN is to the previous, not the 2017-2012.
Yeah.
DCANs previously were a walk through the legislation. One of the issues that's been raised in discussions with planning staff is that they would like a slightly more operationally focused, practical approach. So what we've done as part of our environmental governance work programme, we're working with the councils with an external EIA expert, and we've worked with the planning staff who are dealing with these applications to identify their priorities.
Okay.
So as part of the training that we've tailored, we're looking at those priority areas, and we will do them probably in staged elements of guidance. That's currently underway at the minute, being drafted. The first tranche of training with council staff was in October. The next is scheduled in 3 weeks, and we're taking a core approach for a broader awareness, but also within councils to get people through advanced training. Okay. And it's that core of advanced trained staff who will help move this conversation on against their priorities. So, in answer to the question, the first element of drafting and guidance is currently underway. We'll work with the councils, and hopefully in the coming months we'll get either a very good draft or we'll get that issued.
Okay, so you're working obviously in order to ensure there's best practice, and looking at the other jurisdictions and the work that they carry out in relation to...
Well, the expert we have has broad experience across all jurisdictions. He's bringing that to our area of work, and we want it to reflect capacity areas and the priority areas that the planning staff deal with day to day.
Okay, I mean, it's quite critical that they have adequate training, because obviously they're making quite significant decisions, and it's much easier if they're better equipped than what they have been.
Absolutely, and the training we are delivering is specifically tailored. It hasn't been bought off the shelf. It's being delivered with input from the council staff, and we have this delivered over 4 concentrated blocks under the current contract. So we're talking a significant increase in the numbers who go through this training.
Okay. The 2017 regs also introduce post-development monitoring.
Yes.
And obviously it's going to measure environmental impact. I suppose there has been sort of historic concerns over project monitoring. Will additional resources be given to local councils to carry this out?
Well, I'm not aware about the resource issues. I think that would be an issue elsewhere in the department. But the monitoring itself is where development is approved to go ahead, but where they believe there are mitigation that is necessary. And it's really to make sure that the possible effects that are being mitigated do not happen. So it's a bit of a culture shift in terms of the development. When the development is approved, where there is the potential, but it has been mitigated, there's a requirement to go and monitor to make sure that those effects haven't happened.
Yeah, I suppose the concern would be obviously that if that if they don't feel that they have adequate resource in order to do monitoring, that they may not include that within the recommendation.
Absolutely,
So that
I can
would be-
understand
that
that
would be a concern.
The resources wasn't an issue that I'm in a position to advise on, sadly.
That may be something we should follow up on with the department.
Yes.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Mr. Beggs.
Under the briefing on financial implications, can I first say it is important that we do protect our environment, but we need to make sure we're doing it in an efficient way. And it would seem to be, from your background briefing, that that's what you're saying. You're saying that the new rules may reduce costs as necessary environmental information will be more readily available, and amendments will support greater predictability in decision making. These changes, I understand, were brought in almost 2 years ago. Have you had any survey to determine whether or not we have achieved the objectives?
No, there hasn't been a survey conducted on that.
Have you had any complaints about the process, any feedback at all from those who are using the system?
No, and it might be slightly early given the fact that the significant impacts would be for larger developments that would fall under the 17 regulations. One of the key issues in terms of efficiency is related to actually more effectively defining the issues that need to be addressed, and to counter a tendency to throw the kitchen sink in this into environmental statements. There's a lot of work then in pulling those together. There's a lot of efficiency wasted looking at areas that aren't significant for the planning authority. And further down the track, there is an impact on statute consultees who have to consult and reflect on that. So this is supposed to target and refine the actual areas that are potentially going to be likely affected, to narrow that and reduce the input in the environmental statement. That's where largely the efficiencies are going to come.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Boylan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the explanation. And obviously I welcome this, but I would just ask the question, each of the areas are now going through their area plans. I mean, this would play a big role in terms of zoning and having a look broadly. I appreciate the training and everything else that goes into it, but certainly we have an opportunity to look through that process as well because of the zoning. We know that there's land zone, we know the habitat, yes, and I'm sure that may be part of the training or maybe a discussion at least.
Well, I think the hazard map in the planning system will bring up the protected areas. This is to make sure that the defined process takes all of these into account.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that there's a coordinated approach, particularly between the EIA and the habitats assessment. And that's one of the things brought in, that they are coordinated together.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members content?
Yep.
The Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2017-83, the Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2017, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules Report, has no objection to the rule.
Great.
Thank you. Moving into item 94, which is 2019-112. You'll find that at page 1122 of your packs. And the purpose of this rule is to introduce an inflationary uplift of approximately 1.99% overall across all planning fee categories. This increase is the first increase in fees since 2014 and is essential to enable councils and the department to recover costs directly incurred in processing planning applications. No consultation was carried out, as there has been no change in the policy that the costs of determining planning applications should be recovered through fees. Have members any questions regarding this intent? Okay, thank you very much. Then the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2019-112, the Planning Fees Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2019, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules Report, has no objection to the rule.
Great.
Item 95, which is SR 2019-24. You'll find that at page 1133 of your packs. And the purpose of this rule is to amend a number of statutory rules to clarify that statutory responsibility for the related functions has transferred to the Department for Infrastructure from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. This clarification is necessary because the Department's Transfer of Functions Order Northern Ireland 2016 did not specifically address subordinate legislation made under Section 2.2 of the European Communities Act 1972. Are members content with this rule? Thank you. that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2019-24, the Planning Miscellaneous Amendments Regulations Northern Ireland 2019, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Moving then to item 96, which is SR 2017-88. This is the Drainage Environmental Impact Assessment Regulation, so it might be necessary to get officials in on this one as well, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Give officials, please. Welcome, Julianne. So we are at SR 2017-88, which is page 1143 of your packs. These regulations will transpose European Council Directive 2014-52 EU, dealing with the assessment of the effects of certain public and private projects on the environment in respect of certain drainage works and drainage schemes. This is obviously a very technical piece. Would you like to give a little bit more information just in relation to that, just to members?
Okay. The directive really sets out to protect the environment. The directive came into force in May 2014, and the deadline for transposition was 16th of May 2017. So the regulations we prepared replaced and revoked the previous 2006 regulations, and it was made excuse me, on the 16th of May and came into operation on the same date, because any delay could have resulted in infraction proceedings. So this obviously resulted in a breach of the 21-day rule, and the Department wrote to the Examiner explaining the situation and apologised for that breach. So the regulations ensure that any drainage works or drainage schemes take into account potential impacts on the environment. Drainage works are usually small-scale works with a low budget, and drainage schemes are larger-scale works with a larger budget. The drainage works process for EIA is contained solely within the regulations themselves. The drainage schemes process is an amendment to the drainage order itself, so that's why there are two different parts to the legislation. So the regulations ensure that before permission is granted for any drainage project, DFI Rivers needs to consider the potential it might have on the environment due to its nature, size or the location. And there are various considerations that are set out in the legislation that they must take into consideration. Whenever we made the regulations, we consulted with the key stakeholders, DFI Rivers, the Drainage Council and the Water Appeals Commission. And everybody worked with us in the preparation of the regulations. So the main changes involved in this compared to the previous was that the administrative burden can be reduced insofar as the EIA assessment can be taken in coordination with Habitats or Wild Birds Directive assessment, so that reduces the time spent on that. New environmental factors can be included, such as climate and biodiversity, and the EIA must be prepared by a competent expert, so DFI Rivers would employ a consultant to carry that work out. The assessment must also be considered by a competent authority, and DFI Rivers would use the Drainage Council to do that function for them. And the Drainage Council also has access to shared environmental services if there are any aspects within the assessment that they don't feel they have the expertise to deal with. Any mitigation measures that are agreed that need to be put in place have now to be monitored as a result of these regulations, and a non-technical summary has to be provided.
Members, any? Mr. Boylan?
Yeah, just Chair, on the monitoring, whose responsibility then is it on the monitoring and reporting of it to make sure?
It would be the department.
Up to the department.
Yeah.
And how does that work out? Is that on a case-by-case basis, or is it?
It's a case-by-case basis. If there's any mitigation measures, whenever the assessment is prepared, the environmental impact assessment and statement will have to contain measures that are proposed to mitigate against any environmental impact, and those would be monitored on a 5, 10, 15-year basis.
Okay. It's just in case. I wouldn't like to say it. I mean, generally we react to things, but we need to be proactive. And
Yeah, it is a more proactive approach. Yeah.
I asked it in that context. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Beggs.
it is important to manage how the fact that one bit of drainage can have further downstream to minimise flooding, etc., and also protect the environment. But I'm trying to understand how this will work in practice. If somebody's taking a spade to widen the stream at the bottom of the garden, is that deemed to be drainage? If the road service have a blocked culvert across the road and there's flooding and they need to improve the drainage of the road, will it have to go through a bureaucratic process to enable the emergency work to be carried out? So can you perhaps just tell us how this will work in practice?
Well, these are drainage works and schemes carried out by DFI Rivers, so they'll be on designated water courses.
So it's only DFI Rivers, okay?
Yeah, specifically for DFI Rivers.
Okay.
Members have any other queries in relation to this, or any other comments to make? Intent? Okay. Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2017-88, Drainage and Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations Northern Ireland 2017, and subject to the examiner's statutory rules report, has no objection to the rules. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Members can move then to item 97, which is our draft forward work programme, and you'll find that at page 1182. There have been slight amendments in relation to that. So what we were going to do is going to meet next Tuesday, and we were going to have, we're not going to have our ministerial briefing next Tuesday. That will be moved until the 5th of February. This is all very fluid at the moment, as you appreciate. We will be getting departmental briefings from Roads and Rivers and also from Transport and Resources. If we're having the meeting on the Tuesday, that actually means we're available then to go to the visit on the 29th to the invitation which came through from TransLink, which is at the Mile Water Service Centre. That's where their first use sustainable fuel cell buses, which are powered by hydrogen. So that will be our first visit. So if members are content to approve that, so that will mean that we'll meet then formally on Tuesday with the visit then on the Wednesday. Members content?
Content.
And to do that. Kathy, maybe you'd like to speak to...
Sorry. And on Tuesday as well, we will be doing the SRs that are not subject to assembly procedure. We have 194 of them. They are not open for discussion or having officials here. We cannot change anything that's in them because they're not subject to assembly procedure. So there will be one agenda item in the pack, and all 194 will be listed. The actual SRs are there. If you have any queries on them, you can make queries. We can ask the department, but we cannot change them because they're not subject to assembly procedure. So it will be a big pack. Will I continue?
Yeah, the pack.
The pack, for service standards, we're supposed to get the pack out 3 days before a meeting. So for a Wednesday meeting, we have to get it out on a Friday. So with the best will in the world, we try and get it out tomorrow evening. And it will be sent to you electronically to your Office 365. But because we don't have electronic packs at the moment, we have to go to a printer. So we have to get it to the printer before 5 o'clock tomorrow night for it to be available the next day at 9 o'clock. That's the contract on Friday morning. When we get the hard copy packs on Friday morning, we'll put them into your offices. They'll be in an envelope and put in your offices. It's roughly about the same size as these 2 packs at the moment because there's 194 SRs. But it literally will take 5 minutes to do the SRs in a committee meeting. So, because you're told what they are, and then there's do members note the SRs because they're not subject to the examiner's statutory rules or anything, and then we can get into the briefing.
Mr. Beggs.
Can you just clarify why is it nothing can be changed?
Because they're not subject to the assembly procedure, so we have no right to change them.
Any other queries, Mr. Boylan?
2 bits. Can we agree them in block then?
You agree them in block. They're all agreed in block.
And just, Chair, I'm mindful, obviously, going through an exercise there and responsibility of the committee, most of those, if not all of those statutory rules are now in place. I would suggest now, I know that some of them, certainly we have agreed them all and some of them need to come in, but in terms of us following up on that, is there any way of getting a report back on some of them that may impact, or is that it left at that now?
It's left.
That's it, it's left. Although if we want to explore some some
I don't
outworkings
really
of...
want to get it. I'm only putting the question. I mean, I don't. The majority of them in principle we would agree following through. Some of them, obviously, some of the industries may have been part of the consultation. I don't know, but I don't know.
Well, some of those, actually, what we can do is follow up as we go through the process of this. You can
just
obviously
to
follow
see
up with
exactly
assembly questions
where,
as well, and whenever relevant departments or divisions come up, we can maybe follow up on them as well to see what the outworkings of it. So I think there's an opportunity to explore at that stage as well. So certainly a lot of these things won't be left either. They'll be part of our work as we move forward.
Just in case some of the ones that come up that we might need briefing.
Certainly none of this was satisfactory, but I think given the fact that we weren't here for 3 years, life went on without us.
I appreciate it. It's just the reporting and monitoring of things that, whether they're working well or not. That's.
But this was very much a sort of a tidying up exercise as well. So.
Okay.
And on the 5th of February, hopefully we will have the examiner's statutory rules report for that meeting, because all of the rules that we've done are subject to the examiner's report. So if the examiner highlights anything that's wrong, we might have to then write to the department. Otherwise, if she's content with them, that will mean that we've agreed them subject to the examiner's report. If there's queries, then we will take it further from then.
Okay, thank you.
The ticking time, the clock is still ticking for each one of the SRs.
Thank you.
Okay, so members are content then with the draft forward report programme as we have it at this stage. If you're agreed with that, then any other business will be the date and time of our next meeting, which will be next Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. in this room. That's the 28th of January. Content? Happy to adjourn?
Any other business?
Any other business? No, content to adjourn.
Cathal, just